It's a privilege to be here to talk to you about LANDFIRE and about the TNC LANDFIRE team. I am sorry to say that Randy Swati could not be with us. You missed a treat by not having Randy be a part of this presentation, but hopefully I'll be able to do a reasonable job of representing the program and the team for you, despite my lack of experience in your region. I will do the best that I can. So sorry you couldn't see Randy, but I am appreciative of the opportunity to support him and you in this webinar. So the agenda today is going to be broken up into 5 pieces. We're going to talk a bit about the foundation, the past, about what we're doing, about what we hope to do in the future, and then focus in on some results in that part of the country, the North Central GeoArea for LANDFIRE, which is in effect the Northern Great Plains and the Northern Great Lakes states. Try to zoom in on some data and really look at it, and then present some opportunities for learning a bit more about the program and what it produces. So real quickly, what is LANDFIRE? Well, it's going on 20 years old, 16 years old this summer. It is an interagency and multi-partner program that really is designed to create data sets. And these data sets are representative vegetation, fire, and fuel characteristics. And importantly, it's important for us to use a consistent process for the entire US. And we'll get into that more in a few minutes. But it is a data creation program, that's all. The primary partners, the 2 primary partners really are the land management agencies, federal agencies, the US Forest Service, particularly their Fire and Aviation Management Branch, the Department of the Interior and their Office of Wild and Fire. TNC, the Nature Conservancy, North America region, has been a partner in LANDFIRE since the very first day, since the proposal. And a lot of the work for the LANDFIRE program is conducted through the U.S. Geological Survey's Earth Resource Observation Science Data Center in South Dakota. So those are the primary groups that are involved in the program. So we'll talk a bit about the foundation. So LANDFIRE has a charter. It was created by the Wild and Fire Leadership Council. And it had a lot of things in the charter, a lot of verbiage, but I personally kind of boil it down to 4 C's. They wanted data that was comprehensive. That is, covers every acre of the United States. That is the continental US, Alaska, Hawaii, and then a couple of years later, they added the insular island territories such as Guam, Samoa, Puerto Rico, and US Virgin Islands. So versions must cover all of those areas. The products within the LANDFIRE suite must be compatible, our 2nd C. They must match geometrically, that is across versions, as well as within a particular version. And when we sort of layer cake the products, we try not to create any inconsistencies in the products when we put them all together. So they require very little pre-processing, basically no pre-processing in many cases, but they should be ready to be used out of the box as you obtain them. They should be as current as resources, schedule, budget allow, and they should be as consistent as allowed and as sort of, let's say, possible within the spirit of improvement. And the currency has varied a bit over the years, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And the consistency certainly has changed a bit over the past few versions because we've received a lot of feedback over the years. The LANDFIRE program does want to improve, does want to innovate, so we haven't been entirely consistent from our first product to our current product, but we do think about it and try to make it as consistent as possible. And when you go to compare across versions, sometimes you'll run into some issues. We need to help you with that if you do. So that's one of the things I hope that this webinar does is initiate a conversation. Should you need to go farther with LANDFIRE program products, you know that you can call us, you know how to reach us, you know how to learn more. So when you think about these 4 C's, they give us a box in which we must operate. A time, schedule, resource, budget, all those things must basically work within this box. We deliver 20+ current and historic vegetation, fuels, and condition raster data sets. They're at 30-meter spatial resolution. So there's 20 to 25 of them. It depends on exactly what you call a unique data set. remember, covering all lands of the US. And we have 800 plus, depending on exactly what you count, unique quantitative state and transition biophysical settings models and descriptions. Those are the primary products of the program. And I'll describe those again later as we talk about the review of those products. So we have delivered version circa 2000, that's representing the conditions as of 2000, 2001. That was the original version. It was updated 4 times to represent conditions in 2008, 2010, 2012, and 2014. Remember, those were up. But now we're engaged in a LANDFIRE remap. Before we show remap, let's talk a little bit about this foundation. So I don't expect you to read this table, but this is just to sort of demonstrate the depth and breadth of the program. So the rows represent different products delivered. The far right 6 columns represent the actual versions that have either been delivered or are in process. And the blue letters represent the geographic areas that were actually created in those versions. So I just wanted you to see again the breadth and depth of what's been delivered in the past 16 years. And this table, by the way, is on the website, the LANDFIRE program website, if it is something that you wish to look at. So where are we now in the remap? Well, remap is not an update. It is a recreation of the basic vegetation type, structure, and fuels layers, and then the derivatives, downstream derivatives from those for the entire comprehensive area that we are required to actually work in. So the remap is a recreation, not an update. And so far in the last 2 years, we've delivered this portion of the continental US, the colored portion. What is remaining to be delivered is the Northeast, which will be completed sometime in the next month or so and delivered and made available. Now, what we've delivered so far are the vegetation type, structure, fuels, spatial products. When CONUS is done, when this whole area is delivered, we'll turn our attention to actually completing the fire regime group products, which are things like succession class, vegetation departure, condition class. We'll make the BpS models and descriptions available and things like that. So that will follow after CONUS is delivered for veg and fuels. So what's remained the same in LANDFIRE Remap? We still have the same 4 C's. We still try to be comprehensive, compatible, consistent, and current as much as we can be. Clearly, our currency has not been consistent across time. We are now trying to deliver mostly 2016 products, and here we are in 2020. So we are now 4 years latent, and that is something that we're going to try to work on as a program. Some of our products, by the way, which I'll explain later, are not 2016, so I'll try to make that clear later. But we basically will be delivering all of LANDFIRE 2016 by the middle of LANDFIRE of this current year, 2020. The basic product suite is the same. The basic layers are the same. Not much has changed from the first day to today. But we certainly have changed mapping processes and also the thematic content, typically from user feedback or better data sets being available or more information being available to us or finding errors. All of this was done in an effort to improve the usability of the product. So while the suite is the same, there are some changes between versions that don't really represent landscape changes. Sometimes they're a change in process or a change in ancillary data set or something like that. So again, that's why we have to be a little careful when we compare across versions. You can do it, but just be careful and contact us if you run into questions. Another thing that has not changed is that it is still out of the box as delivered, a large landscape, regional, national data set. LANDFIRE is not a local data set, is not intended to replace local data. It might be a place to start to create local data. You might be really fortunate and it's 90% good out of the box, but you should not expect this to represent small areas with enough fidelity that you can use them as delivered. You should, as you zoom in on areas, expect to be required to make changes. It is large landscape, regional, national data out of the box. So what's new in Remap? Remember I mentioned some new processes? Well, instead of using NLCD map zones, which don't have a lot of ecological relevance, we now carve up the country to do the production using Omernic level 3 ecoregions, which do have much more ecological relevance and allow us to focus in on what really should be there when we go to map. We have a new and improved sort of background image creation methods that are behind the scenes that you wouldn't see, that allow us to create a better set of, it's more consistent and it has higher quality. Auto keys are used by LANDFIRE to assign ecological system vegetation types and also NVC group vegetation types to field plots. We need those field plots to drive the mapping process. We must assign categories to those plots. We use a program called an auto key. They are geographic. There are, I think, 12 different ones across the country. And we've been using them since the very first version, but we found some problems with the original versions. We spent a lot of time trying to improve those auto keys. Those auto keys are available to you should you be interested. It's hard to find them, but if you want this new improved auto key, we can certainly provide it to you. It is how we provide vegetation plot information to the mapping processes. It's through these auto keys. We have new Landsat 8 imagery. In the past, we had to use 5 and 7. There were striping issues. That was sort of old technology. Now we have Landsat 8 imagery. And we also have something called Landsat analysis ready data sets. So we have more imagery available to us, right? Just pulling it off the shelf at Arrows to do this mapping. So that's also a nice improvement for us in this version. One of the things we were able to do was to build into the production schedule an external review of the vegetation type legend. What should be there when we go to map? And also the draft products. When we've created a product, we send it out for review, get feedback, and make changes to that product. We were not able to do that before, but we think that that's a place that has helped us avoid significant problems with the data sets by having them reviewed before they're provided and on the website for you to download. Something else that new is we've independently mapped NVC group. This is the National Vegetation Classification. It is a de facto standard for federal projects to use the NVC. In the past, we had to crosswalk that from ecological systems, which was not a neat and clean crosswalk. But now we actually independently map most NVC group categories. So it is an independent product, not a crosswalk. We now have many more field plots. I would guess that there might be twice as many field plots in our reference database than we had originally when we did the original mapping of LANDFIRE. Field plots are extremely important to the mapping process. Now, I think we have more than 1 million plots in the database now. All of those cannot be used because some of them have been harvested or converted. Some of those may be old, but it's very clear that we had many more plots, more widely distributed by type and geography than we had originally with LANDFIRE. That certainly helps the mapping process. We were able to incorporate many LiDAR data sets to improve how we map structure product. By structure, I mean vegetation cover and vegetation height. And LiDAR doesn't cover 100% of the country, but it covers enough of it where we could create a process to extrapolate and use LiDAR information to actually, we think, improve the resolution and content of the structure products. We tried to incorporate things from other programs that seem to be useful, such as the National Land Cover Database. Continuous Shrub Cover project had a big focus on mapping cover for shrublands, and we were able to work with them to incorporate some of their results and their processes into us to hopefully improve the quality of that product, because mapping cover in those semi-arid lands is not easy, so that was very helpful. We had a review of the biophysical settings, models, and descriptions, and I'll go into more detail about that later. So there will be a new suite of models and descriptions that will be available to you once the fire regime products are delivered by LANDFIRE. A couple of new products. One is a historic disturbance layer, which was able to sort of create historic, let's call it a 10-year composite of the disturbance history of every pixel across the US as mapped by LANDFIRE. That is primarily mapped by events being submitted to us, events that we go and find somewhere, you know, or that we detect through some sort of remote sensing change detection. So we consider sort of a 10-year window for disturbance, and we now have a product that gives you a composite of that disturbance. And I mentioned earlier about some products not being the year of the name. So LANDFIRE Remap is also called LANDFIRE 2016 because it mostly represents conditions in 2016. But the fuel models and the surface canopy, the surface fuel models and the canopy fuel models are now delivered in the year, or now represent the year in which they were delivered. A process was used to sort of move those forward in time from 2016 to the year delivered. So if you use fuels products in disturbed areas, remember disturbance is important here, then you can expect them to be more representative of current conditions than are not representative of 2016. We've also created a new backwardly compatible fire regime group schema. So fire regime group turned out to be kind of an important sort of category description for people to use in planning and fires and looking at the natural disturbance regime. And the old group schema didn't seem to be particularly useful for people in some parts of the country, and they asked for a change. So we created this new schema, which is backwardly compatible. The original schema is on the left, Roman numeral 1 through 5. Remember, fire regime group is a combination of the severity and the fire return interval. So all we did was divide the two sort of higher frequency fire regime groups, 1 and 2, into 3 groups of fire return intervals. So we can tell the very short fire return intervals, say 0 to 5, from those that are not as short, 16 to 35. So this will be a new product that will be delivered as a part of the biophysical settings products, a fire regime group. But remember that this is historic fire regime group, not current fire regime group. This is an attribute of the pre-European settlement vegetation, not the current, but it should tell you something about the site and what the native fire regime and disturbance regime is for that site. So hopefully this will be more useful to you than what we've delivered in the past. Let's talk a little bit about quality. It's always on people's minds. What is the quality of this data? And we might use the word accuracy. I use the word assessments. We can interchange those words as you desire, but we have always conducted as much assessment as possible to provide as much information as possible. We do still conduct assessments on the existing vegetation type product for ecological systems and NVC group. Those are direct assessments, comparisons of what LANDFIRE mapped to what our plot database said was there. NVC macro group is just rolled up from NVC group. That's one level higher in the hierarchy. And SAF SRM cover type is still important to some people, but it is still only a crosswalk from ecological systems. So it's not really quite an independent assessment. It is dependent upon ecological systems. But all 4 of these assessments are provided by us to you on the website that you can download to sort of examine how we assessed the quality of existing vegetation type products. We had thousands of independent plots. We actually withdrew a sample of plots from the plot database to use to test against the mapped product to actually see how closely they matched. We had 7,000 plots to do this, and that sounds like a lot, but it's really not. We really didn't have a sufficient sample. We didn't want to draw too many because if we draw too many, we don't have enough plots to map. So we tried to strike a balance between the independent testing plots as well as the mapping plot. So we have 7,000 plots. Not enough, not perfectly distributed, but it does provide some information on the assessment of the existing vegetation type products. We present a traditional contingency table, which I'm going to show you in a moment. Importantly, we also present a real example of how you collapse categories in a contingency table so that if you do not use our native ecological systems or NVC group, in other words, you collapse categories, you can still use the contingency table by doing a little sort of adding and subtracting within the table, and I'll show you how to do that. So this is a traditional contingency table. You'll find one of these for ecological systems, NVC group, NVC macro group, and SAF SRM cover type. The rows represent the LANDFIRE mapped product. The columns represent the plot database. And the intersection of those is a cross tabulation of what LANDFIRE called it versus what the plot database said it was. Remember, 7,000 independent plots. That's what drives this contingency table. So when you see the contingency table, the yellow would be the major diagonal. Those represent matches, okay? So there were 42 plots that were central mixed grass prairie in the plot data set that were also mapped as central mixed grass prairie by LANDFIRE. So that's a traditional contingency table. It's a cross tabulation of reference versus map product. Unfortunately, this is what the contingency table looks like, because in the North Central area, there are 122 ecological systems mapped. So this table is 122 by 122. Makes it hard to interpret. I mean, I've shrunk it down to sort of, that's not even the entire table. I've shrunk it down to try to get as much on the screen as possible. The information's there. If you want to use the contingency table, you can. But you can see this is a reason why many people need to collapse categories, because not many people need 122 types. Maybe you only need to map, you can lump all the oak systems, or you can lump all the tree systems versus the grassland systems, or you can lump in as many ways as possible. We didn't want to do that for you. So you can lump yourself, and then you can use this example that's provided to you in the contingency tables that shows you how to, in effect, lump the contingency table to provide you some reference material on what LANDFIRE says the agreement is. How good was the product based on our assessment? We also provide something called a category agreement table, which is a simplification of the contingency table by just looking at the rows. Remember, the rows is the map product. Some people would call this producer's accuracy. Some others would call it user's accuracy. I get away from that issue by calling it category agreement, because it's looking at the LANDFIRE map categories. So each type in the contingency table that had a sufficient sample is included in this table. It tells you what the source of that data was. We actually created this type from the actual plot database. So it was mapped independently by us. Not everything was. Tells you how many pixels there were in the independent, how many pixel plot combinations there are in the independent test plot database. How much of the test plots, that's sort of a proxy for how prevalent they are on the landscape. And then how much they agreed. So 78.5% of the time on this independent data set, LANDFIRE mapped the same thing as the plot database said it was. Importantly, the next three columns show you what the primary disagreements were. So the primary disagreements for northern tallgrass prairie were central mixed grass prairie. The next most prominent mismatch was central interior sand and gravel tallgrass prairie. So this is key information that I think that helps you determine whether or not LANDFIRE products are useful to you, or how I may lump categories and still have useful information. Because all this is in the contingency table. This just makes it easier to find that information by looking at the key mismatches that were found in the LANDFIRE product. So I hope that you'll find this table useful. I think it is a better way to present the information. So that's the vegetation type agreements. Right now, we are hoping to perform an assessment, a similar assessment for vegetation cover and vegetation height as well. We have not done that yet. We haven't done that consistently through time. We're hoping to be able to do that sometime soon. And we're going to try to explore if we can test the quality of the fire behavior fuel model product. That's very tricky. There's not a good reference set to use there, so that may be difficult. Another thing we'd like to try is how many disturbances are we missing out? How many false positives do we have? But again, the data to support that is very scanty, so we have not done those to this point. So the LANDFIRE Future. We're going to wrap up CONUS, as I've said, sometime this summer. We're going to finish up the fire regime group products, hopefully this summer, early fall for CONUS. We're already working in Alaska, Hawaii, and we hope to finish all those 3 additional territories sometime over the next year or so, depending on what else comes out of the sky that we have to deal with. But that is the plan at the moment. So we should be wrapping up LANDFIRE Remap sometime in the next year. Obviously, remapping is more expensive and slower than updating. It's unable to predict whether or not we'll ever do another remap. So that makes the updating process that we apply in the future even more important. And we are currently working on ways to provide more frequent updates, maybe annually, maybe delivered within a few months of some things, maybe not everything, with decreased latency. That's very important. We want to produce products more quickly, but not with less usability in a way that impacts you dramatically. There may be a trade-off between time and quality. We have to balance that. So we're going to be careful and try to do that well. But there is a desire to get products more quickly that represent more current conditions. So that may require some changes in the future, not only by us, but also by you. So now I'm going to focus a bit on North Central results. This is where I'm a little bit out of my element. However, I've been there a lot, been to many places in the North Central area. I've canoed in the boundary waters, and I've been to around the Upper Peninsula. I've been to lots of places in the North Central, but I've not lived there. I have not worked there. It's not the same. I can say that this is a photograph from the Black Earth Prairie in Wisconsin, which I was privileged to be taken to by Sarah Hagen, which was a revelation for me to see places like this. And it really sort of drives my desire and our desire to be very supportive of you and what you do, seeing what kind of landscapes that you have there and that you need to deal with. So I hope that this again initiates a conversation between all of us, between the LANDFIRE team and you, to provide better products to support you. So these slides were provided by Randy, and I'm going to sort of try to compare old with new so you can see the difference rather than focus on how accurate the current is, but let's look at the differences, the changes. So this is the LANDFIRE version 2014 product, vegetation type product for sort of East Central, the Upper Peninsula, east of Marquette. And Randy provided these because he saw there were problems in the LANDFIRE 2014 data. Odd shape for this island out in the lake. Here's some peatland forest mapped in this circle, and some plantations mapped in this circle. So these is feedback that we provide to the program and say, you know, something needs to be done. So this is the LANDFIRE 2016 vegetation product, the Remap product. You can see a better shape for this island. We probably had better ancillary boundary files or something that allowed us to map this better. This circle in the southeast here, some of the things that were mapped as peatland forest are now mapped as conifer-acidic swamp. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's better, but that's what Randy pointed out. I'm hoping that that's a better and more useful product for you. And then out here in this circle in the northeast, things that were mapped as plantations have been now mapped as jack pine forest. I think that's more indicative, more reflective of the local conditions. And you can see that there are many jack pines now mapped on this area that maybe were mapped as plantations before. So this is a result of feedback, changing mapping processes, getting more field plots, all this stuff combined to try to make a better product. So now I'm going to move out into the prairie, and I picked this area. This is the Touch the Sky Prairie in western Minnesota, because I have been here. We have had a team meeting in this area, and we did go out to this. So I have a picture in my mind for what this looks like. Again, a revelation to see a true tallgrass prairie for me, being a southerner. You'll see the Google Earth image on the top, the LANDFIRE 2014 vegetation type on the right, and the 2016 on the left. And on the right, you'll see there's a lot of sort of magenta, which is mapped as eastern, cool, temperate, undeveloped, ruderal grassland, not mapped as tallgrass prairie. There is some tall grass speckling in here, but the new product, this orange, is northern tall grass prairie. So again, an impact of having more plots. We got a lot of plots from NRCS in non-forest types, which I think probably helped us here a lot. Knowing that we needed to make some changes were made. You do see that there are still, if you look at the Google Earth, it's not all native prairie. There are meadows and other grasslands and stuff mixed in. So hopefully the 2016 product is a little better. And just to expand on it a little bit so that you see this orange area here is northern tall grass prairie. There are still some other things in here. That is the nature of raster data that has been uncleaned and unsmoothed. So you need to be aware of that. It isn't perfectly clean data. That's why it's not a local data set as delivered out of the box. But hopefully it represents the general pattern well enough for you to use at least as a starting point. So here's an area along the Mississippi River. I believe it's called the Driftless area. We had a team meeting in Minneapolis and we went to Mississippi River Bluff State Park. And then we took a trip up the river here, and you see a Google Earth again on the top. That's the town of Winona, sort of in the bottom central part. LANDFIRE 2014 veg type on the right, 2016 on the left. You can see there's not a gigantic difference between them, but to me, the product on the left does look more natural, does look like a better pattern on the landscape. The types are similar. This aqua blue is North Central Interior Dry-Mesic oak forest and woodland. The little scattered pixels in it, I believe, are maple basswood. Pretty similar over here, but a little bit blockier, a little bit less reflective, I think, of the land use pattern. So again, that's the idea of the mapping improvements and the processes that we employ. So again, this is a little bit of a blow up just to see what it looks like as we go in. And this is about the scale, what I call large landscape. About, I don't know, I usually in my head start off with 100,000 acres. That's a starting point, not a hard and fast number. But I'll say, what does it look like at 100,000 acres? Does it look realistic? I start zooming in and zooming out to see what I think. This looks pretty realistic to me. Again, that would be a local decision, but I do think that you see that this is actually a pretty good looking product. It's a national product. We're going to focus in on this one little square here in a minute, really zoom in on it to look at the data. So I want you to see where it's set on the landscape. Another important improvement was we now create continuous vegetation height and cover products. Instead of bend 10% classes for cover and 5 tree height categories, 4 shrub height, and 3 grass categories, we now create continuous data sets. So trees are in 1 meter for height, herbs are in 1/10 of a meter, shrubs are in 1/10 of a meter, shrubs go up to, I think, 2 meters. So there's a lot more thematic resolution in the LANDFIRE data set than there was before. That's important. And so we're going to really zoom in on an area here. Remember I told you we were going to go in on a red square so you could see it. This is that sort of, I just picked it because it's a distinctive looking field next to the river. So this is LANDFIRE vegetative cover, in other words, canopy cover on the right from 2014, on the left from 2016. Both of them sort of represent the shape of the fields and things better, but you see a lot more gobbledygook, pixelated stuff in the one on the right. You don't see a lot of variation in the tree cover or the shrub cover, the orange tones, but you see a little bit less raster artifacts on the left, a little bit more realistic looking. You see a lot more variation in here because we're delivering 1 meter tree heights rather than 5 categories of tree height. And here we zoom in on it a little bit more just so you can see the nature of the data. This is way beyond what we expect LANDFIRE data to be used outside of the box. Maybe you could run a smoothing routine on it, make it look better. We don't do that because we don't know what you need. But this is a good picture of what the veg cover data looks like, the vegetation cover. A lot of variation and a little bit more realistic looking. What about height? Same area on the right. Again, vegetation height. Remember, 5 categories of tree height. You can see this is all one blob, green blob, because one of those categories of tree height was 10 to 25 meters. Well, if you look on the left, we're now delivering 1 meter tree heights, and you can see the variation that you get. Doesn't mean this was wrong. It's just not very resolute This would allow you to bend this data however you want. Do you want to see all trees that are greater than 30, or between 20 and 30, or between 10 and 20? That's what this data will provide for you, is allow you to bend the data however you wish, instead of how we decided to do it. Okay? So a lot more thematic resolution in the structured data, and that comes from using LiDAR, which we were not able to use in previous versions. Again, a zoom in on the height. This is what, maybe a couple of thousand acres, probably well beyond what we'd expect LANDFIRE data to be used out of the box, but could be useful to you. So BpS review. Biophysical settings, BpS, is LANDFIRE's name for pre-European settlement. So whenever you see BpS, whenever you see historic, we're talking pre-European settlement. So we had a bunch of models and descriptions that describe the vegetation dynamics of all the pre-European settlement vegetation types, ecological systems. Well, we sent those out for review. All of them were made available for review. Many of them were reviewed, some of them were not, but all of them were reviewed by the team to look for redundancy, duplication, errors, things we needed to fix. Many were externally reviewed by other people to update with new science, to find errors, to split things differently than we did in the past. So this review is a major change in the model and description suite. We spent a lot of time making succession class rules, we think, better, more mutually exclusive, exhaustive. We've developed a new description document so you don't have to open the model to see all the parameters. And we've created a new way to access these models and descriptions. So this is an example of one that received extensive review and in fact resulted in a split. We used to have this Laurentian Acadian Northern Pine Oak Forest as one BpS. Well, the reviewers split one out and they wanted one that was pine dominated, which is now called Laurentian Acadian and Northern Pine Forest. And you see it received extensive review by many people across the area, and it resulted in a new description and a new model, and thus new fire regime characteristics. Remember, historical fire regime characteristics, not only for this model, but remember there's a pine dominated model now as well, which would be a totally new model. This model results now cascade through reference conditions, vegetation departure, vegetation, all kinds of places. So these changes are important. This is one that received a lot of review. All of them received some review. So we hope that the new model set, once it's delivered to you sometime this summer, will be even more useful to you than it's been in the past. This is the new website that we have created. It's not available to you publicly. We could help you find models if you wish. Once it's made available to you, you could do a lot of interesting searches here by text, by map zone, by type, and find models that are useful to you. So that's what this will do, and we'll promote this once we know that it's available. But if you need help with models today, for some reason today, we will work with you to try to get those to you. Example applications, Wayne National Forest. Wayne National Forest was in a planning process. They needed a terrestrial ecosystems assessment. They turned to Randy Swati on our team, and he worked with them to use different LANDFIRE data sets, other data sets, et cetera, to actually create this draft assessment of the terrestrial ecosystems. And specifically, they used LANDFIRE type, cover, height, as well as some historic disturbance characteristics modeled by LANDFIRE. But this is an example where they actually rolled up, and see they rolled up into dry oak forest, dry mesic oak, and bottomland mixed hardwood forest. So that's what we found is people typically lump categories that we provide. Sometimes that presents a problem, sometimes it doesn't. But that's on the Wayne National Forest down there in Southeast Ohio. Here's an assessment of Michigan forests that Randy conducted with a TNC volunteer in the Michigan chapter named Laura Slavsky, where they used LANDFIRE data to do just sort of a big general assessment of the forests in Michigan. It's actually presented in the form of a website. There are tabs across the top. You can tab across to see what you want to see. This was written in R by Randy and Laura based on LANDFIRE data. So it gives you sort of a dashboard assessment of the Michigan forest. And so if you click on this particular tab, you get how LANDFIRE mapped the current forested ecosystems. A lot of northern hardwood forest. very little white spruce fir, hardwood forest. Okay, so you can tab across and see different things, again, based on LANDFIRE data, but it's an R Markdown website document. This is an interesting one that I think you'll find kind of neat, which Randy worked with, again, Laura, to create what's called a chord diagram. This is a snapshot, so it's not interactive. If you had the native chord diagram, it would be interactive for you. As you move around the outside, these chords or bands change. And what you see is on the right are historic vegetation types, lumped. On the left are current vegetation types, and the bands connect historic to current. So LANDFIRE says a bunch of historic hardwood types have been converted to agriculture. A bunch of historic hardwood types are still in some kind of hardwood. Some historically hardwood types are now in developed, okay? So this is called a chord diagram. It's interactive. It's one of the things you can create when you compare historic to current data. So take-home messages, LANDFIRE products, comprehensive, compatible, as current and consistent as they can possibly be. You may need help with this, we will try. They are still designed for use at large landscape, regional, and national scales, but they can be modified for local use. We have successfully done that many, many times. As a starting point for your data, your models, we can help you. There are videos on our YouTube channel that may assist you in this, but we'll also do our best to help you if we can. So Remap incorporated new processes and data sets that we think improve the usefulness of these products, mostly representing conditions in 2016. However, we leave it up to you to determine for yourself and whether or not this is an improvement or not, what still needs to improve, where did it work, whatever feedback you have, we want to hear it, good, bad, ugly. We need to hear what you find. If we're ever going to serve people better, we must hear from you. We need more plots. Vegetation plots drive our processes. If you have geo-referenced, up-to-date vegetation plots, we love them. We need more data on disturbances from you. You know, wind throw, insects, ice damage, fires, whatever kinds of disturbances occur on the landscape, we want to hear from you. That way you don't have to rely on us to find them in an update process. If you send them, we will incorporate them. This is how you provide information to LANDFIRE, either through the help desk at landfire.gov or through the website at landfire.gov. There is a contact sheet where you can make contact with the program. This is our contact information. I'm Jim_Smith at tnc.org. And that's Randy Swati. Many of you probably know him. There are other members of the team in your area, Kim Hall in Lansing, Sarah Hagan in Minneapolis. If you know them, feel free to contact them. Two other team members, Megan Detmeyer in Nevada, who introduced herself earlier, and Corey Blankenship in Oregon. So if you know one of us, feel free to contact us. We'd love to help you. That is one of our roles in the LANDFIRE program. If you want to learn more about LANDFIRE, go to the program website, go to TNC's open access science website called Conservation Gateway. And I'm sorry that I don't have a better address than this bit.ly, but just go to a search engine, type Conservation Gateway, LANDFIRE, and you'll come right to our presence there to learn about applications, interviews, blogs, etc. Twitter, we're on Twitter. Follow us if you're interested, or just go visit the site. Again, a YouTube video channel, lots of good things there. Megan mentioned the monthly postcard. This is the way that you can learn things passively by having us send it to you. It is only once a month. We hope that you'll opt in if you're interested in learning and keeping up with the LANDFIRE program about applications, interviews, product announcements, did you knows, things like that are in the postcard. So that's a good place to really keep up with LANDFIRE. And then the Nature Conservancy also has a LANDFIRE mailbox. It is something that we check. We hope that if you can't remember any of the previous ways to contact us, you can contact the LANDFIRE team through this TNC mailbox. So that's all I had. I really appreciate your time. I went by really fast. Hopefully there are some good questions. And I thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jim. This is Megan here. Just wanted to share with you a couple questions that popped up in the chat window. So folks, just a reminder, there's still about 70 people on the webinar. Please go ahead and put your questions either in the chat or the question and answer. One person had a question: can users access photos of the field plots?
Some of the field plots have photos, but they are not necessarily a part of the LANDFIRE reference database that can be delivered. I would have to check to see if it's possible to get those. I've never gotten that question before. So I'm going to make a note and see if I can find out for you, okay?
Sounds good. While you're taking your note, I just wanted to mention that we just launched a poll. So there's a couple questions. We'd love to hear your thoughts on how this talk went, and yeah, some other interesting questions in there. So Will Barnum asked, is there a map available for the independent plots that are used in each region?
There is a map of plots that could be made available to you. However, I will tell you that many of the plots that LANDFIRE uses are considered proprietary by their original providers, and they do not allow us to share the location of those plots. For instance, FIA, we cannot share that information. Some of the NRI plots from NRCS, we cannot share those. But certainly there is a set of plots that we can share the location of those plots. And you can contact us and through the help desk, and we will try to find that for you or determine how we can make that for you. But it will not be complete.
I was muted and I was talking to myself. Sounds good. So Peter asks, what sorts of improvements, if any, are there to the CBD layers?
CBD, oh, canopy bulk density. Okay, sorry, I had to edge that up. I am not a fuels expert, Peter, so I'm going to be struggling with this a little bit. You know, that's an art that I'm not really conversant in. But one of the things they have tried to do is to make them consistent with the surface fuels in terms of the year. So they're all the same now, representing the year and the time since disturbance. I don't know that they've used a new modeling process to model, because that is a modeled product, canopy bulk density and also canopy base height. So I do not know that they've used a better product of individual model to create those. We do hope that the vegetation layers, which create the basis for the canopy bulk density, as well as the canopy base height, are better, so we would result in a better CBD and CBH product. But I'm not sure about the modeling process itself, Peter. So if you want me to find out about that, I will, and see if something has been tweaked in the actual CBD, CBH modeling process. I do not know.
Sounds good, Jim. If anybody has any other questions, please put them in the chat window before we sign off. And if you haven't already taken the poll, please go ahead and do so. We still have about 60 people left on the webinar, and we'd love to hear from you. Let's see. Jack, I'm not seeing any other questions. Are you?
No, I'm not seeing any either at this point.
You know what? I just noticed Ron said he Googled for the website for the Michigan Forest Rapid Assessment. Jim, is that website live right now? I don't think Randy has made it available. Do you?
Yeah, I will check with him, but as far as I know, it's still in development, Ron. Sorry, but if you'll send us your name when it is made available, if it's not, I will make sure you find out about it, okay?
Yeah, I think he was saying it was going to be shortly or soon it would be available, but yeah, I believe it was still in development.
Yeah, that's why I miss Randy. He would know. Sorry.
He has an answer for most things, doesn't he?
Cool. Well, I guess let's give a few more, or just a little bit more questions to see if there are any. Just to follow up, we had folks asking if this is recorded, and yes, it is. And I'll get a PDF and the recording links up on our website. I'll also make sure Megan and Jim both have those so that Megan can post them where needed. And on our website, I'll make sure that I have all the contact information that Jim has listed on this last slide too.
Sounds good to me. I'm not seeing any other questions. So thanks so much, Jim. Thank you, Jack, for inviting us to give this talk today. And again, if you missed the subscription to our postcard, just scroll up in the chat window and you can grab that link and subscribe, and you will be updated accordingly.
And I also left the link for the archive website. So I'll leave this open for a few more minutes in case people need to grab any of these links off. Otherwise, again, thank you, Jim, for doing this. Thank you, Megan, for joining, and made it really easy.
Thank you all so much
at all the
for
questions.
hosting. Yeah. Thanks everyone for participating. I really appreciate it. Let us know if we can help.
Thanks all.